Hello and welcome to Indus News, live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the top stories first. The Taliban say no progress has been made in the latest round of high-stakes intra-Afghan talks in Doha. A spokesperson reiterates a strong, centralized and independent Islamic system is necessary for peace in Afghanistan. He says the group has repeatedly confirmed its readiness for negotiations, but Kabul needs to show the same commitment. Colombia says a former Haitian Justice Ministry official may have ordered the assassination of President Jovenel Moise. Police Chief General George Vargas says Joseph Felix Badio directed two former Colombian soldiers 3 days before the attack. Meanwhile, Haitian authorities say the slain president's funeral will take place on the 23rd of July. And 6 days before Tokyo Olympics opening ceremony, organizers have registered first case of COVID-19 at Athletes Village, where thousands will stay during the Games. Meanwhile, Brazil logged more than 1,400 daily deaths from the virus and over 45,000 cases. In Pakistan, 39 people have died and over 2,700 tested positive for the virus in the past 24 hours. While globally, the coronavirus has claimed more than 4 million lives and has infected over 189 million people so far. The death toll from flooding in Western Europe has risen to at least 160. Germany has recorded 133 fatalities, while 27 people have died in Belgium. Authorities say hundreds remain missing after record rainfall triggered severe floods in the region. Well, these were the top stories. News in detail after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. The Taliban say no progress has been made in the latest round of high-stakes intra-Afghan talks in Doha. A spokesperson reiterates a strong, centralized and independent Islamic system is necessary for peace in Afghanistan. In a series of tweets, he said the group will not allow any attempt to undermine the territorial integrity and national unity of Afghanistan. He said the group has repeatedly confirmed its readiness for negotiations, but Kabul needs to show the same commitment. The spokesperson called on all the stakeholders to cooperate for the better future of Afghanistan. He also urged all parties to stand firm against ethnic, regional, linguistic and other prejudices. Israeli forces have injured at least 75 Palestinians protesting against the illegal Jewish settlements in the West Bank. The troops fired tear gas, rubber-coated bullets and live rounds on protesters in Nablus, Kfar Kadum and Kalkilia. The Palestine Red Crescent says 10 people were wounded by live bullets while 15 by rubber bullets. It said dozens of others suffered breathing difficulties due to inhaling the tear gas fired at the protesters. Meanwhile, Palestinian Foreign Ministry urged the United Nations Security Council to stop the Israeli ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. It said the conditions imposed by Israeli forces undermine any chance of achieving peace on the basis of the two-state solution. Colombia says a former Haitian Justice Ministry official may have ordered the assassination of President Jovenel Moise. The development follows a preliminary investigation involving Haitian and Colombian authorities alongside Interpol. Police say Joseph Felix Badio gave directions to two former Colombian soldiers 3 days before the attack. Police Chief General George Vargas said Badio also worked in the anti-corruption unit with the General Intelligence Service. Meanwhile, Colombia's Vice President and Foreign Minister Marta Lucia Ramirez said Bogota will send a consular mission to Haiti. Ramirez said they will meet with the detained Colombians.
The instruction that has been given with the President of the Republic is to provide them with all the support so that they have legal assistance, to ensure that they are in adequate health conditions, that they are in a place of detention that is adequate, that life is protected, and the rights and guarantees that due process should have are also protected.
Haitian authorities say the slain president's funeral will take place on the 23rd of July. Now, Beijing has strongly condemned U.S. sanctions on Chinese officials, saying it will firmly retaliate against American bullying. Washington imposed curbs on 7 Chinese individuals over what it calls Beijing's crackdown on democracy in Hong Kong. In a statement, Foreign Ministry's branch in Hong Kong said the U.S. move has seriously violated international law. It called Washington's sanctions and updated business advisory extremely unreasonable. The office accused the U.S. of smearing Hong Kong's business environment and endangering China's national security. It urged Washington to immediately cease interference in Hong Kong and China's internal affairs. And now, 6 days before Tokyo Olympics opening ceremony, organizers have registered the first case of COVID-19 at the athletes' village, where thousands will stay during the Games. Meanwhile, Brazil logged more than 1,400 daily deaths from the virus and over 45,000 cases. Globally, coronavirus has claimed more than 4 million lives and has infected over 189 million people. More details about the pandemic in this report. Even with the aggressive vaccine rollouts in developed countries, the outbreaks are again emerging and spreading fast. The U.S. public health chiefs have warned of an extraordinary surge as cases are rising in all 50 states. This comes as the World Health Organization proposed another study into virus origins in China, including audits of laboratories and markets in Wuhan. Meanwhile, Chinese Foreign Ministry said the country's experts are studying the draft proposed by the health body. However, it denied the lab leak theory as extremely unlikely.
China has taken note of the draft proposed by the WHO for origin study, which are being studied by Chinese experts. China's position on the issue of global origin tracing is consistent and clear. All parties should respect the opinions of scientists and scientific conclusions instead of politicizing the issue. The plan for the next phase of study should be led by member states and agreed upon through consultation.
In Europe, the fresh wave driven by the Delta variant continues to sweep the continent. Spain's 2-week contagion rate rose to 537 cases per 100,000 inhabitants, while a new curfew is imposed in Catalonia. France reported more than 10,000 new cases again as the rapid spread of the Delta variant led to a jump in new infections. Over in Australia, disappointments have turned into despair as lockdowns have failed. Vaccine rollouts start to bite back. Meanwhile, leaders of the Asia-Pacific Trade Group pledged to expand sharing and manufacturing of COVID-19 vaccines to fight the pandemic.
Now, in that regard, 4 weeks ago, APEC trade ministers met together and agreed to remove any existing trade barriers and tariffs that exist for vaccines and consumables associated with the vaccine rollout. It may surprise you to know that vaccines can in some cases face tariffs of 6%. Vials and packaging, 20% in some cases. Syringes face tariffs. So it is a very real problem that APEC economies have the ability to remove.
Meanwhile, Thailand has imposed a nationwide ban on public gatherings and is considering more restrictions amid record cases. Meanwhile, in Pakistan, the coronavirus has claimed 39 more lives in the past 24 hours. The Health Ministry says the death toll has reached 22,760. The ministry said more than 2,700 people tested positive overnight. It said the caseload has crossed 986,000, out of which over 918,000 people have recovered. The ministry said there are over 45,000 active cases in the country. It noted more than 2,500 people are in critical condition. The annual HAJJ pilgrimage has started in Saudi Arabia's city of Mecca. Pilgrims perform a tawaf around Kaaba while maintaining a social distance. Some 2.5 million pilgrims used to visit the holiest sites of Islam in Mecca and Medina for the week-long Hajj. In response to the pandemic, Saudi Arabia has restricted the Hajj to its own citizens and residents for the second year running. The event will be limited to a maximum of 60,000 vaccinated participants. A Hajj ministry spokesperson said every 3 hours, 6,000 people enter to perform the tawaf of arrival. He said a sterilization process is carried out at the sanctuary after each group leaves. Moving on now, the death toll from flooding in Western Europe has risen to at least 160, while hundreds remain missing. Record rainfall caused rivers to burst their banks, devastating the region. Germany authorities say 90 people lost their lives in the Rhineland-Palatinate region. They say a further 43 people have died in neighbouring North Rhine-Westphalia. In Belgium, the floods have claimed 27 lives so far. Waters are receding across much of the affected regions, but officials feared that more bodies might be found in cars and trucks that were swept away. European leaders have blamed the extreme weather on climate change. Experts say global warming makes torrential rainfall more likely. Heavy rains also hit Switzerland and Luxembourg, while the Netherlands has declared a national disaster in one of its southern provinces. Now in Lebanon, at least 24 people, including 10 soldiers, have been injured during demonstrations in Tripoli. Protesters clashed with the army that has been deployed to quell the unrest over the worsening socio-economic conditions. The army said 5 of the soldiers were wounded in a hand grenade attack. Meanwhile, the international community continues to call for progress in the country's stalled political process. France, the European Union and the United States have urged Lebanese politicians to form a new government as a matter of urgency. An international conference is also being planned to support the efforts. Earlier, Prime Minister-designate Saad Hariri stepped down over disagreements with the president on the cabinet. Now, the United Nations says at least 75 children have been killed in Myanmar since February's military coup. A Human Rights Committee says it also received credible information about 1,000 children arbitrarily detained by the forces. In a report, it strongly condemned the killings that it said were carried out by the security forces and police. The committee said some victims were killed in their own homes. It also pointed to the military practice of taking children hostage while they are unable to arrest their parents. Meanwhile, in a statement, committee chair Mikiko Otani said children are under siege and facing catastrophic loss due to the coup. United States President Joe Biden says the spread of COVID-19 misinformation on social media is killing people. Talking to reporters, Biden said the misinformation is holding people back from getting vaccinated. He said the only pandemic America now has is among the unvaccinated population. Meanwhile, Facebook says it will not be distracted by such accusations. Spokesperson Kevin McAllister said the facts show that Facebook is helping save lives. The White House has been increasing pressure on social media companies to tackle disinformation. One is coming up in this news bulletin after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now, in the U.S. state of Oregon, a raging wildfire has expanded to become the state's 5th largest blaze in more than a century. The sprawling blaze in the southern part of the state forced firefighters into retreat for a 4th straight day.
The blaze, which broke out on the 3rd of July, forced evacuations from many small towns in California's 3 counties. Officials say more than 1,700 firefighters are battling with the aggressive fire. Meanwhile, the boot-like fire in Oregon has blackened 144,000 acres with no containment so far. The National Weather Service issued excessive heat warnings across much of the region. Temperatures in Death Valley spiked to 54 degrees Celsius, making it one of the hottest spots on the planet. Last year, wildfires scorched more than 17,000 square kilometers of land and destroyed hundreds of Californian homes.
Now, NASA says every U.S. coast will experience rapidly increasing high tide floods starting from mid-2030s. The dramatic prediction pushes the previous deadline forward by about 70 years. Report has more details.
As climate change and its impacts continue to take a toll on the planet, the study by NASA comes as a further eye-opener. High tide floods are already a familiar problem in many cities on the U.S. Atlantic and Gulf Coast. NASA says a lunar cycle will amplify rising sea levels caused by climate change. The floods will sometimes occur in clusters, lasting a month or longer, depending on the positions of the moon, earth, and the sun. It particularly noted a dynamic termed moon wobbling causes the tides to vary.
But when we look at the other factors causing sea level to change, we focused in on one in particular. So what we call the nodal cycle, associated with basically the orientation, the relation of the moon relative to Earth. And what happens is that there's this very long period signal, roughly 20 years, and this effect from the moon causes the tides to vary. So what we found is that this effect lines up with the underlying sea level rise, and it will cause flooding specifically in that time period from 2030 to 2040.
NASA says the effect of the dynamic highlighted by the team applies to the entire planet. It noted the northern coastlines, like in Alaska, are rising due to unrelated geological processes. The study is already gaining traction as it changes the perception of the impacts of sea level.
But this study shows that because of how these different factors combine, we're going to see some near-term effects worsening in locations that are already feeling those effects, but starting in locations where they're not. So I think this is eye-opening for a lot of people. But again, I think it's really critical information for planners, and I think there's a great amount of interest in trying to get this information from science and scientists into the hands of planners.
Scientists identified coastal areas low enough to make them vulnerable to a 1-meter rise in sea level. They found that 62% of these low-lying areas are located in the tropics, with a third of the total in Asia.
And now let's have a look at how the weather is doing around the globe. That is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus News.